wisdom, when I was a senior in college, I accidentally gave about a 20-minute speech on a blowjob, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing. By the end of this conversation, I really want all of us to be best friends, and it's kind of like a show of good faith. I'm going to share with you all my most embarrassing moment, flashback to college. So, in college, I was a bit of a goody two-shoes, like 4.0, didn't break the rules. I wouldn't have even really wanted to be my friend, to be honest with you. So my capstone marketing class, my professor kind of pulled me to the side and was like, okay, Rebecca, I know you've been working really hard in class. We've got a group project, and I have like a fun little assignment for you. You're going to be in a group, and you have to do a presentation. Your entire grade is going to rest on how you and these two football boys can do a marketing project together. And I was like, well, here goes my 4.0. That's like unfortunate, but we'll handle it. So I get our first project together, and I'm like, okay, boys, you're not going to mess this up for me. We're going to be just fine. I'm going to get them in line. It's going to be all right. So they were on time for every single project. They knew exactly what I wanted them to do, and they executed it like almost flawlessly. The problem is, from the very beginning of the semester, I'm pretty sure that they like knew they were going to prank me at the end of it. Hence the embarrassing presentation. So I get up at the end of class, and the boys had like put together this PowerPoint. They had a marketing plan, and the assignment was we had to come up with a project and like create a brand new item, and then create the marketing around it, which they had done. The problem was not the item. The thing that we were trying to market was a self-sanitizing door handle. That was great, perfect. They even put the PowerPoint together with like pretty colors and animations, and so I get up in front of the class on the final day of the presentation. I push start on the presentation, and in slides in the name of this product that the boys had put together. And that name was Slob on the Knob. I had no clue, absolutely no idea what that meant, and I proceeded to present to my college class for 20 minutes so anyway, end of the day, I get a call from the dean who's like, hey, Rebecca, got some unfortunate news for you. Either A, you didn't know, or B, like, that was a really good acting job, and you should probably receive an Oscar. Unfortunately, I didn't know, didn't get an A on the project, and I learned a lot about leadership, that maybe like I came across too strong. Anyway, that being said, now that you all know my most embarrassing moment, you all owe me yours at some point in the next like week-ish would be great. I also want you to know that just because you're standing up in front of the room does not mean that you have it all together. Like sometimes we give embarrassing presentations, and sometimes we stand up in front of the room and we talk about things that are uncomfortable. And that's where I am tonight. Last year we talked about like brain stuff and science stuff, and that was like my jam. Tonight with the self-love era, that's hard. And I think it's really, really hard for everybody. But for me, it's something that I've actively been working on in my life. You know, gosh, it's probably been, I lose track sometimes whenever you're in like the nitty-gritty of things. But about 2 years ago, I ended what was a really horrible phase of my life. Unfortunately, I made the decision to have an affair. And it absolutely wrecked my marriage. It wrecked my business. It wrecked a lot of friendships. And I started at that point really taking a look at myself and going, okay, Rebecca, what are these decisions that you're making, and what's it mean? And what I found is that I really didn't have a clue what it meant to love myself. And so that's the journey that I've been on the last couple of years, and that's what we're gonna talk about tonight. So what I need you all to know is that as I'm sharing, these are not like Rebecca's an expert conversation. If you wanna talk like business and finances, I'll be an expert in that. Whenever we're talking self-love, what we're gonna talk about is like, this is 3 years of therapy and my takeaways. So bear with me as I kind of share what this looks like. One of my favorite books in the world is called The Big Leap. Well, let me tell you what we're gonna talk about first. Tonight we're gonna talk about what it looks like to show up and love yourself mentally, emotionally, and physically. And to start with, we're gonna talk about what it looks like to love yourself mentally. My favorite book in the world, if this is something that you are working through just like I am, is called The Big Leap. And it talks about the different zones of our life. Now, the first zone that we have is your zone of incompetence. And whenever you're showing up to love yourself mentally, one of the biggest things that we all have to learn, especially as women, is that we are not good at everything. Everybody look at your neighbor, and I want you to say, you can't do it all. Excellent.
But I do.
Okay, come back to me. Very good. We can't the author talks about in this book, The Big Leap, is he's a therapist, and he sits down in front of one of his clients, and she's like pissed. And he's like, what's wrong today, Kathy? And she's like, I spent 4 hours trying to set my computer up. And he's like, why did you do that? This is a woman that was like in charge of $1 million company. Why were you setting your own computer up? And she said, well, the tech guy was going to charge me $1,000, and I didn't want to pay him $1,000. So he said, instead, you're telling me that you spent 4 hours of your day and now a $200 therapy session when you could have just paid somebody else to do it. And she was like, yeah. And what he kind of helped her figure out is, had she taken 1 hour and gone and done something that was in her zone of genius, which was leading the company, she could have made about $10,000. And instead, she chose just not to pay $1,000 to the tech guy. Are you following me? Because there's a lot of us that spend a lot of time on things that are in our zone of incompetence we shouldn't be wasting our time on. The next zone that the book talks about is our zone of competence. These are things that others do just as well as you can. Whenever you're showing up in this zone, you're like mediocre at best. I'm going to share an example here. I am currently a room mom in my son's class. Absolutely have no business being a room mom. I hate sending the emails. I forget to send the emails. I don't collect the money for Christmas. Like, it's not my thing. And yet I said yes to something that was just basically my zone of competence. I bet there's 5 other moms in the class that would be way better at that than Rebecca is. But I said yes to it. And instead, I'm kind of sucking myself out of things that I could be giving my time to. Following me still so far? Okay, so we want to get out of these 2 zones. And when we talk about loving ourselves mentally, it's just the ability to kind of self-recognize, that's not my jam. Next year, I'm not going to be a room mom. Are you following? Okay, now we're going to talk about our zone of excellence and our zone of genius. And we're going to kind of wrap these together. So your zone of excellence is things that you rock at. A lot of times when we show up in our zone of excellence, we're adding value to the people around us. For women, many times we take jobs in our zone of excellence. You're a great teacher. You care about people. You're an incredible nurse. You're good at real estate. Whatever it is, you show up in your zone of excellence and other people kind of realize it. The problem and the danger in this zone is that it may not feed your heart. Just because you show up and other people tell you how good you are at something doesn't mean it's actually your passion. So that's where we jump up to the zone of genius. These are things that you are uniquely suited to do, including your passions, your strengths, and all of your gifts. I'm going to use Shannon as an example because she's perfect for this. Shannon, straight out of college, probably could have gone and gotten a job at any fitness studio she wanted. She could have done personal training, and every single person that she would have trained, she would have added value to their life. People would have told her that she rocked at being a personal trainer. She could have made meal plans for people and really truly lived a pretty good life. But she would have just been operating in her zone of excellence. Because what we all know is when Shannon shows up in her zone of genius, she does this, right? She gathers people and she does challenges, and the lives that she affects showing up in her zone of genius. Can you imagine if she just said, I'll be a personal trainer, that sounds good. And what scares me for many of us in this room is that you might just be hanging out in your zone of excellence. And what if there is a whole room of people out there that need you to show up in your zone of genius? Because to be very, very honest with you ladies, I need you to show up in your zone of genius. My life is 10 times better because Shannon did. What if we all chose to step into that? Are you following me?
Preach, girl.
The question I want you to ask yourself and think about is if you could go back and talk to Shannon whenever she was making the decision that we all have to realize was probably really, really scary. When she was making the decision to open up the gym, what would you have told her? If you could go back and be like, Shannon, you're going to change my life. You don't get it. You can do this. And then I want you to turn around and have that talk to yourself. Whatever this zone of genius is that you've been putting off and not thinking about and scared to do, I want you to give the Shannon talk to yourself. All right. Mental love. Knowing what we're good at. Secondly, emotional love. There have been times in my life, as you all can imagine, where I did not trust myself. I couldn't look myself in the mirror. I had made these mistakes, and I was like, what in the world am I doing? And I really had to dial in what it looked like to love myself emotionally. The biggest piece of that for me was trust. I had to go back to the very beginning and go, what is love? Love is being able to trust someone. A word that we hear a lot whenever we talk about love is intimacy, which literally just means see into me. whenever we are learning how to love ourselves, it can be so, so hard, you guys, because I know myself more than anyone in this room ever will. And I know what goes on in here. And so a good example here would be, you know, this Blush 180 challenge that we did, where like you have a group of people and we're all doing it together and we're showing up. I trust the girls that were in my group like I would trust them with my life, to be honest with you. And yet I don't even trust myself. And the reason is you can't lie to yourself. I know every single time that I said I was gonna drink my water and I didn't. I know every single time I said I was gonna eat my macros and I didn't. But I bet that all of those girls in that group trust me even more than I do. So when we're talking about how to show up and love ourselves emotionally, one of the most important things is to set goals that you can actually attain. This is like straight from my psychologist, so you can call and talk to him if you don't like it. They always say whenever you set goals like, shoot for the moon and you'll reach the stars. But when we're talking about self-love, setting goals that you can actually meet, it's the most important. And it's one of the ways that I kind of crawled out of this hole that I put myself in, was to be like, okay, Rebecca, what's one goal that you can actually meet? So maybe instead of saying, I'm not gonna drink for 30 days, you say, what's a goal I can meet where I can build trust with myself? Because the number one thing is that I love myself. Maybe instead of saying no alcohol for me for 30 days, it's only on Saturday. I don't know what it is, but one of the most practical things that I learned over the last few years was the importance of setting goals that I knew I could meet. And it took a little shot to my pride to be like, I'm not gonna like do this big crazy one, but the woman that's up here today is much more confident than the one that made a whole bunch of goals that I was never ever gonna meet. So that's my practical takeaway. If you struggle with loving yourself emotionally, try that. Small goals that you can build confidence in, and it was a game changer for me. So the final piece of this that we're gonna talk about, and I'm gonna get a drink because this is actually a really fun one, is how I truly, you guys, like learn to love myself physically. And you would think that we might talk about like macros or water or working out, but Shannon's in her zone of genius, and so we're not gonna talk about that at all. We're actually going to talk about how we can comfort ourselves physically. Because what I've learned, this is the biggest group that I've spoken to openly about my story, but I've had a lot of conversations with women one-on-one. And what I've learned is that one of the reasons that we hurt so badly is because we look to other people to comfort us, or we look to alcohol to comfort us, or we look to bad habits that we don't want to talk about to comfort us. And so I was like I'll tell you, there was one day a couple of years ago that I like looked in the mirror and I just broke down crying. And the reason was, it had been like weeks since I made eye contact with myself in the mirror. Have you ever done that? Where you can't even look at yourself? And I realized that all of this like guilt and shame that I was carrying, I had to physically get rid of. There was no way that it could stay in my body anymore. I had to get rid of it. And so that's the physical love that I'm talking about, is being able to realize what's going on in here and to take care of it. So we're gonna talk about some really cool like physical body stuff for about the next 2 minutes, and then I'm gonna wrap up. So there's a process called havening. Has anyone ever heard of havening? Oh, good, that's great. So I thought I found this like really cool hippie thing with the therapist that I go to, and then I was on TikTok a couple days ago, and it knows what you're doing at all times, and it was like, Justin Bieber loves havening, the Kardashians love havening. I'm like, damn it, this isn't like new and fun, but I'm so glad I get to share it with you all. So the process of havening is actually a way that you can settle your brain down. I'm not even gonna ask for a show of hands, but I'm gonna guess that statistics say about 70% of us in this room struggle with either depression or anxiety. One of the big issues with that is that our brain is like way over here while our body's over here. So havening is a process of settling your brain down. It literally takes your amygdala and it helps your body to release what's called delta waves. Delta waves are typically only released when you're sleeping. So the fact that there are some pressure points that I'm going to teach you tonight that can really help your body like take a step back, this helped me so much over the last couple of years to feel like I had control over my body and my mind. And so I just want to share that tonight to wrap up. So everybody like kind of loosen up with me. Perfect, much better, I feel better because we're all tight. I'm supposed to be nervous, not you. All right, so I'm going to teach you 3 different movements that that have like blown my mind and helped me a lot in recovering. This is also used a lot in trauma therapy. If any of you or like friends or family ever want to talk about like some of the trauma stuff, I have all the recommendations. So the first way that you can really settle yourself down if you're ever in a place where you're anxious and really nervous is simply by touching your face. Now, what I thought was really, really interesting about this is how many of us, whenever we get nervous, touch our face anyway? Anybody else? Lindsay's like 2-minute cardio, and we're like, okay, right? What's really cool, and this is just I think our bodies are amazing, our bodies show up and they tell us what we need. So one of the ways that you truly can comfort yourself is this. Down your face slowly and over your cheeks slowly. Those are pressure points in there, and it's literally gonna settle your brain down. Another one that you can do is rubbing your arms down like this. And if you go home and you look up on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, havening, you'll like get an idea for this. What I think is interesting about this one is how many times do we see people who are like not being super honest? Colby's like, hey Rebecca, you wanna go get coffee? And I'm like, sure, Colby, I'd love to. She's gonna know I'm lying. What's really, really cool is that our body tells us what we need. Yeah, stop rubbing your arm. So another way that you can comfort yourself is by doing this, and you can also know the next time somebody's like rubbing their arm, right? I think it's so cool that our body tells us what we want. So the final way that you can release some of these delta waves that we've been talking about is literally just by rubbing your hands together. And again, this is really like one of the things that sold me as a therapist is like making me touch all these weird places. I was pissy about it at first, but I'm like, you know what, you're right. How many times when our kids get nervous, do they like twitch with their hands? It's your body showing up and really telling you how to settle yourself down. So, I hope with everything in me that we can all show up and love each other. But what I hope more than that is that we can show up and love ourselves. And what I want to wrap up with today is not necessarily giving you specifics on how to love yourself mentally, emotionally, or physically, because we're all going to be at different places in our life with what we need, but just some awareness around what you need is really important. One of my favorite quotes in the entire world, and I'll leave you all with this, is I was on a Zoom call with a mentor a couple of years ago, and he wrapped up the call and he just like casually mentioned, you know, healthy things grow and growing things change. And I was like, wait a second, back up, say that again. And he said, Rebecca, there's a lot of changes coming, but you have to remember that healthy things grow. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And growing things change. And so if you're at a place in your life where you've been stagnant or where you feel like some things need to change, rather than looking at it and feeling like this is unhealthy or scary, try to embrace it a little bit and go, yeah, you know what? This is changing. This is good. Because I truly believe that each one of you has a really big calling. Not that Shannon's not special, but I believe every single woman in this room has a zone of genius. And we all need each other to show up.